Hi, I'm Missy with On William Street, and we are here to help you become a more confident quilter through piecing, quilting, to even picking the right thread. And this week we are going to do some walking foot quilting. So walking foot quilting is one of those methods that is a lot easier to use if you are not a free motion quilter, if you just don't have the desire or the talent. So I love to be able to work on my projects, to design, to piece, to applique, to do all that part of it. I don't love the free motion quilting side of things. I just don't, my brain just doesn't have that. My sister says it's just like drawing on fabric, and my brain just does not do that. My brain doesn't draw on paper very well. So walking foot quilting is perfect for me because I can still get those projects completed, add some fun designs to them, and not have to worry about going outside of my comfort zone too much. So this week we're going to talk about 3 different designs, and they're all going to use a grid setup to start off. So it's going to be 3 completely different looks when we're done, but they're all going to use the same grid to start with. And a couple of tools that we're going to use for our grid, for our marking, is we're going to use a butter knife. And you're thinking, a butter knife for quilting? Trust me, we'll get there. And then also having your rulers. You want to have your rulers on hand. And then a marking pen is another option that you can use in place of the butter knife. So this is our quilt block that we are working on designing. These are some minis that we've created and put together, and we want to go ahead and get them finished up. So we already have our quilt sandwich. So we have our backing fabric, our batting, and then our top fabric. And for this one, we're going to do a very simple grid. So this one is a crosshatch grid. And so we've got 2 different rulers that we can use for this. This ruler I love. It's just a 1-inch ruler. If you want to do like a 1-inch crosshatch, then you can just use this to do your guides all the way down. We're actually going to do a little bit bigger of a crosshatch. So we're going to do a 2-inch. So we want a ruler that's a little bit bigger so that we can mark those lines. And for this one, I'm going to show you how we're going to use a butter knife in quilting. So we're going to start by laying out our ruler right here along this edge. It doesn't have to be exactly straight. We know that sometimes our tops get a little off, and we fix that in trimming before we do the binding. So don't worry too much about that. Just keep it as straight as you can. And we're going to use the back side of our butter knife, and we are going to just mark, just kind of press that nice and tight along there. And then you're going to see that that's going to give us just a nice line that we can then follow with our quilting. So we're going to start off by marking our marks all the way across, and then we'll switch it around and do the marks going the other direction. Okay, so now that we've got lines going one direction, we want to go ahead and switch around for the other direction. So on this one, you don't really want to line your mark up to the side of that because you want to make sure that your grids are an actual grid. So line your ruler up right along one of those lines, and then go ahead and make your mark going that direction. That's going to help get you a nice, good, solid grid as you go across your quilt. Now that we have everything marked, we've got a nice even grid across our quilt top. We can go ahead and take this over to our machine, and we're going to get this quilted. So we'll just follow these lines that we've marked and get this completed. So with our walking foot quilting, we're still going to want to start with this center line. So you want to always work your way out as you're doing your quilting. Otherwise, you can potentially end up with a bunch somewhere, and you want to make sure that you're not having seams that you're then having to spread out and have issues there. So we're going to start right here at the top, do a line, follow that all the way down, and then we'll move over to the next line and follow it all the way back up. Now on this, I'm just using white thread. You can use thread to match the quilt or the project that you're working on so that it doesn't show up as much if you want to, but we actually want this to show up so that you can see what the quilting looks like. Okay, now that we've finished this one side of the quilt, we're going to go ahead and just sew down the outside. You don't need to worry about pulling this off the machine to move over to the other side, the other half of the quilt. Just sew all the way down around the edges. Now that we've got the grid going one direction complete, we'll go ahead, we'll go around the corner and start on the other direction. So now our grid is complete, and you can see we've got a nice quilt, added just a little bit of texture to this. A couple of tips that I want to point out specifically with walking foot quilting, and this is something I do. I'm always told, my mom and my sister, they tell me it's a walking foot, not a running foot. I'm really bad about that. I like to run with my walking foot, so I always try to make sure to mentally slow it down, especially as you're like coming to these points, and then you can also just add some tension to the bottom portion of the quilt as you're sewing that down, and it'll help with your puckers so that you won't have puckers in your quilt. So kind of keep that in mind. It is a walking foot, not a running foot like I use it, and having a little bit of tension pulled at that bottom end will just help a little bit with those puckers. So now we are ready to move on to our next technique. Okay, so this one, again, we're going to mark the same grid on this quilt, but this one is going to be a chevron design when we're finished. So we're going to use a 1.5 inch grid for this. You can really use whatever size of grid you want. If you want something that's got tighter quilting, you go smaller. If you want it to have looser quilting, then of course you go bigger. And we're going to take this time we're going to use our heat erase pen. So this is one that is specifically made for fabric. And you want to make sure that anytime you're using any type of marking pen, you want to test it on your fabric somewhere to make sure that you're not going to have any issues. This one is great. It comes off when we iron it. So we'll go ahead and align our first line up to make our mark, and then just draw that right on the fabric. So we've got our first line ready to go, and then we'll go ahead and just use that to mark our 1.5 inches, and we'll go all the way across. Okay, now that our grid is all marked out, we're going to take this over to the machine and sew our chevron. So what we're going to do, and again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start in the center. It's best to start in the center and work your way out. So we're just going to go from corner to create our chevron throughout the quilt. Okay, so we've got in our machine, go ahead and put your needle down, and really, since it's a small grid, I'm just going to go ahead and eyeball from corner to corner as I sew this. And then lift it up and go back over to the other corner, and then just go all the way across the row. So now we have our chevron all quilted on there, and again, you can change the width, the length, whatever you want to do on these. If you wanted a tall chevron, then just change how you're doing your grid on that, and you can get lots of different varieties of ways to do that. So for this last one, we're also going to use, again, the same grid, but we're going to do it a little bit different. We're going to do a 1-inch grid, and we're going to use the quilting for this direction of the grid, so we will need to draw one in the center, but for the rest of them we won't need to. So we're going to line it up, make sure that we're lining up along that quilting then to try to get it as even as possible. We'll go ahead and mark this all the way across. So for this design, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to sew the straight lines going this direction, and then we're going to go in after that and put in our zigzag. So now that we've got our lines completed, we can come back in and add our chevron. So we're going to just go from our corner to corner up and use these quilting lines, and when we get to the middle, we're going to use that line that we added in here and go back and forth the other direction in the next line so that we've got a fun design. So now we're going to go the other direction. So we're going to come down to here, and we're going to come back down to here and meet the point. So it almost is a little bit of a diamond with the line in between it. This one is now complete, and you can see we've got our chevrons with our lines in the middle. It adds some really nice texture and is really fun to use. And you can use this on any type of quilt block. It doesn't have to be something with the straight lines where you're utilizing that as one of your grids like we did. You can just draw your grid just like we did on the other two and use this on any project. We have one grid, and we ended up with 3 completely different designs, and you can change these up. You can make them bigger, you can make them smaller to fit whatever project that you're working on, and all we needed was our walking foot. Thank you for watching us this week. Please remember to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see what we're working on. You can subscribe to our newsletter and get access to our subscriber library with lots of fun tutorials. And don't forget to like our videos so that you don't miss any of the next ones coming up. And we'll see you next week.